Hello, all. Welcome to Beyond the Black. If you haven't heard part one, here's what you need to know. Most co founder disputes don't start with a betrayal, they start with a conversation nobody had early enough. Vesting schedules, IP ownership, a 50-50 split with no deadlock clause. The structural failures that build quietly in the background while founders are still trying to make the company work. Part two is about a different kind of problem. Not the early failures, but the conflicts that arrive when things actually start going right. An acquisition offer on the table with two founders who want completely different things. A clause that looked like boilerplate and turned out it wasn't. And it decided who keeps the company. A departure that should have been clean and wasn't. This is part two of When Founders Fight. I'm Maitrabh and Vasundhara is back.
Hi, Maitrabh. Thank you so much for having me back again.
All right, Vasundhara. Let me start with the scenario that founders are least prepared for and honestly most terrified of. For example, if one co founder wants to take up an acquisition offer and the other doesn't, what determines who wins that argument, legally speaking?
Oh, I think honestly, this is one of the most emotionally brutal moments in a startup. Because on paper, it sounds like a business disagreement only. Should we sell the company or not? Should we get acquired or not? But underneath that, it's usually two completely different life philosophies colliding. While one founder is thinking, on the lines of, this changes my life, this changes the future of the company, this changes my financial status, and we should take the win. The others perhaps thinking, we haven't even built what we came here to build yet. I'm not done. I want to build more. And suddenly, the same company means two different things to two different people. Now, legally, people assume the louder founder wins, or the one who built more wins, or the CEO wins. But that's not necessary. The answer usually lies in boring documents that nobody wanted to discuss in the beginning. Who owns how much equity? What voting thresholds apply? Do investors have veto rights? Does the board need to approve the deal? Is this a drag along situation? Are there reserved matters in the SHA? And that's the technical answer. But the real answer, the power. Who has legal control when emotions enter the room? And founders massively underestimate how complicated this gets after the investors come in. I have seen founders own the face of the company but not the control the outcome anymore. I have seen investors push for exits because the fund life cycle demands it. I have seen founders block acquisitions because emotionally they could not let go of what they built. The company almost starts resembling a marriage during a divorce negotiation. Everybody remembers different promises, everybody thinks they sacrificed more, everybody suddenly interprets the vision differently. And this is why founder alignment matters so much. Because the biggest startup fights usually don't happen when the company is failing. They happen when success finally arrives and people realize that success might mean different things to each person sitting at the table.
A marriage during a divorce negotiation. That's the most honest description of an acquisition fight I've ever heard till date. And in an actual divorce, there's a judge, right? Here, the judge is the SHA, the shareholder agreement, and the board composition. Documents written when both people still liked each other and couldn't have imagined this specific moment of their business trajectory. So, in a co-founder acquisition dispute, who actually who's the actual judge basically? Like, is it the board, is it the investors, or does the law just provide the battlefield and not the resolution?
I think that's exactly the problem. In a co founder dispute, there's possibly not always a judge available. The board can, of course, decide if the documents give it a workable majority. Investors may have consent rights or commercial influence. But honestly, if the founders are genuinely deadlocked, neither the board nor the investors can automatically declare a winner. And I think the law can also provide the battlefield. There can be contractual remedies, arbitration, tribunal proceedings if the dispute becomes oppressive or harmful to the company. But the law is also not particularly good at deciding whether the acquisition offer is smart or whether the pivot is visionary or whether one founder is correct or not, right? That is why I think the real solution has to be drafted in advance, and has to be essentially, done in a way that it regards all different aspects of what can happen and should happen in a worst case scenario. Otherwise, the founders may discover that they've built a company with two drivers, and that's a big issue.
Ah, so the law provides the battlefield and not the resolution. Yeah, that is one of the most useful framing of this thing. So, two drivers, one company, no clear mechanism for when they disagree, which is exactly why, I feel that some agreements try to build in the resolution in before anyone needs it. There is a clause specifically designed for something like this, and I'm sure most co-founders have never heard of it, and very few know of it, and they actually know what it actually feels like when this clause gets triggered. So obviously, I'm talking about the shotgun clause. Would you like to walk me through it?
Oh, honestly, you'd be surprised to know that there are several clauses that founders have perhaps never heard of, but they end up signing agreements even when these clauses appear. A shotgun clause sounds very sophisticated when you first hear it, maybe even cool. But in reality, it's one of the most psychologically violent clauses in startup governance. It's perhaps not a very common scenario in the Indian space because, it's basically designed for one specific situation when two founders have reached a point where they simply cannot run the company together anymore. There's a deadlock, lack of trust, no alignment, and no workable middle ground, essentially. So, the clause basically says that, fine, one of you names a price, the other one chooses whether they can buy or sell at that exact price. And, while that sounds fair in theory, but emotionally it can be brutal. Imagine a situation where you're building a company together with a co founder of yours for almost 7 years, 8 years perhaps. Sleepless nights, death, shared dreams, near shutdowns, tiny wins nobody else understood but the other person. And then one day, your co founder sends a formal notice saying, I'm invoking the shotgun clause. At that moment, the startup stops feeling like a company. It's almost like a hostage negotiation situation. Because now, every single thing becomes strategic. Was a valuation intentionally kept low? Is one of the founders financially stronger? Can one actually arrange capital fast enough to buy the other one out? Was this clause triggered to pressure the other person emotionally? Or is one of them bluffing? And here's why it gets dangerous. The founder with the deeper pockets often has an invisible and obvious advantage. So, even though the clause appears to be balanced, in reality, it has an unequal financial power which can completely shape the outcome. Honestly, I've seen founders trigger shotgun provisions knowing that the other person simply cannot raise funds quickly enough to buy them out. And the clause hence becomes less about fairness and more about forcing an exit for the other person. But at the same time, I mean, obviously, every clause, every aspect of a contract has a flip side as well as a positive side. So I would say this clause also obviously exists for a reason. Sometimes, companies become paralyzed, nothing's moving, every decision's becoming a war, all the employees are suffering, investors are panicking, and the growth in general dies. And at some point, the law has to create a mechanism that says someone has to drive this company now, and if you both cannot work together, pick one. The fascinating thing is, most founders negotiate these clauses casually during incorporation, like, just another legal paragraph, without really realizing that one day this clause may decide who keeps the company and who walks away from the thing they helped build with some money in pocket.
Psychologically violent. That is exactly the right phrase because on paper it looks like the most elegant mechanism. It's not a resolution or forcing function, basically. It ends the stalemate by giving leverage to whoever has more capital, which isn't exactly justice, but sometimes is the only thing that moves the company forward, right? And yeah, given all that, the financial asymmetry, the psychological pressure, should founders just push back on a shotgun clause entirely when negotiating their SAH, or is there ever a good reason to agree to one?
Honestly, I would not reject a shotgun clause automatically, but I would also not treat it as a harmless boilerplate clause either. In theory, it is definitely beautifully fair. I name a price and you decide whether you want to buy me out or sell to me at the same price. Because I could end up on either side of the transaction, right? And I am incentivized to quote a reasonable number. But that logic assumes we both have comparable access to capital. And let's say if one founder can raise 5 crores over a weekend and the other cannot, it is not really a duel, right? It's not really a fight. It is one person arriving with a sword and the other one with a strongly worded email, perhaps. So there are still good reasons to agree to it. It can break a genuine deadlock quickly and prevent the company from remaining paralyzed for months. But I think founders should also negotiate guardrails. It should be triggered only after escalation, let's say, or when mediation has failed, or there should be like a realistic time period to arrange financing, to come to a decision, and the valuation process should also not be designed to create a problem for the less liquid founder. So think the answer is probably not never agree to it, but it's possibly more on the lines of do not agree to a shotgun clause unless you understand who's actually holding the gun and what is the way out of it.
Know who is actually holding the gun. That's the whole answer, really. And the conversation. Who's holding the gun? What are the terms? What's my way out? All these things has to happen before you are in the room where someone is already using it. Before it gets there, is there a version of a co-founder separation that actually ends things cleanly? Or if a co-founder is going to leave and both sides handle it well, what does a clean exit actually look like to you?
Honestly, Maitrabh, I think a clear founder exit is one of the rarest and most underrated signs of maturity in the startup ecosystem. Because, let's be honest, founder exits are almost always messy. They're in the news, they're all over the media. And obviously, these are when we talk about bigger companies, but there's also smaller companies where founder exits can be really, really messy because there's resentment, there can be passive aggression, there can be confusion inside the team, a lot of inconsistency, instability, and people could be picking sides, legal notices floating could in the background, allegations against each other, lots of mudslinging, LinkedIn posts, these days pretending everything is amicable while everyone internally knows that it wasn't. But when a founder exit is handled well, it almost feels like a surprisingly calm event. A clean exit usually starts with one difficult but honest conversation. The exiting founder saying, I don't think I'm the right person for the next phase of this company anymore, or I don't think I can put in as much time, effort, or energy as you are going to from now onwards. And that level of self awareness is incredibly hard to find because founders don't just leave jobs, they are leaving identities, they are leaving something that they've built for years. Now, legally, a good exit is all about clarity. Who retains the equity? What happens to the unvested shares? Is there going to be a buyback? What happens to ESOPs? Are IP rights fully assigned to the company? What are the confidentiality and non compete expectations? Who communicates the exit publicly and how? And does the founder stay on as an advisor for transition or completely cuts off from the company? Everything should get documented properly. No assumptions or emotional side promises. No, oh, we'll figure it out later. But beyond legality, the healthiest exits usually share one thing: neither side tries to win or one up the other. The remaining founder or founders don't treat the departing founder like a traitor, and the departing founder doesn't try to destabilize the company on his or her way out. thinking that, now that they're not a part of it any longer, they can potentially get the best of it. And that balance, I would say, matters the most, because your employees are watching, investors are keeping an eye, future acquirers are watching. It can be a public show. And a chaotic founder exit just lets the market know that this company has governance risk, and there is a lot of instability, and hence affects the future of the company as well. However, on the other hand, if there's a graceful founder exit, that lets the market know that this company is bigger than individual egos, and then has a promising future as well. And honestly, I would say some of the strongest companies are not built by founders who stayed together forever, but by founders who knew how to separate without destroying what they created together.
So neither side tries to win. That sounds simple, but it's not all that simple at all, right? I mean, and the team has been watching all of this. They have built their trust around these both founders, not just one. So, how does the remaining founder communicate a departure internally without basically destabilizing everything underneath?
Honestly, I think that's a management question more than a legal one, and I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer it. But of course, I think, see, how I would have done it, or how I would have suggested it is done is, I think, more than needing the details of the full dispute, the team, what they look for is clarity. They might have certain, amiability, or a relation with a certain founder, and who's perhaps the founder exiting, but at the end of the day, they're working for the organization. So I think what the remaining founder can do is acknowledge the departure respectfully, not blame the other founder, or not make a lot of information public about that, and just explain how the changes will be affected operationally, who's going to be leading, making decisions, and what is the team's roles now, if it's been changed or if it's the same. I think people can definitely handle change, and what destabilizes them is being in the dark, being kept in the dark. So I think here the message would be very, very simple, that we're going in different directions, and but we've built what we have till now together, for which we're grateful, and now the business has a clear path forward, which is whatever it is. So I think that could potentially be the best way of taking this forward.
People can handle change. What they can't handle is being kept in the dark, basically. So the communication has to be clear, calm, and operational from day one, not emotional. Everything that we have talked about today, the vesting disputes, dead equity, acquisition fights, the IP gaps, they all trace back to the same moment, ideally. Something wasn't in place early enough. Was that one thing that would have changed the most out of this?
I mean, honestly, I think founders, more often than not, fail to kind of even get into founder agreements in the beginning of their association, or in the beginning initial conversations. But when you ask this question, I would like to say that it's probably not just one single clause. It's like a full conversation that two people who are trying to build something together need to have. And I think, founders never put like an honest discussion about what happens if the vision changes, what happens if, in case one of them wants to pivot in a different direction, or one of them decides that the way of operation that they're taking on currently is not the right way to go ahead. And because I think in the beginning, every founder thinks that they're negotiating success. They discuss valuation, they discuss growth, they discuss scale, they discuss funding, and almost nobody negotiates disappointment, the burnout, the jealousy, unequal effort, mental health, money pressure, change in market scenarios, and all of that. And also the possibility that one person may outgrow the company or outgrow the vision, and or maybe even worse, something like the possibility that if in case the company succeeds, or when the company succeeds, founders stop wanting the same future for the company and for the business. So I think, while the tech agreements can become technically sophisticated, they remain to be emotionally and contextually incomplete. And it is a little bit of a flaw on both sides, the side of the person who two people who are working on this agreement, and also on the perspective of the lawyer who's not possibly able to understand or imagine the kind of relation these founders have with each other, and what to in the future expect or navigate through. And years later people end up fighting over things such as acquisition offers, exits, tech blocks, on ownership. And you genuinely end up thinking, why didn't they think this through better? Why didn't they kind of write about this better, or capture this better, or discuss it better in a conversation between them? Because as much as you discuss getting together to work with someone, you also need to discuss what happens when one of them doesn't want to work together. So, and I think the founders who survive the longest are usually not the ones with the smartest paperwork. They're the ones who have had uncomfortable conversations early, I would say. Asked each other questions such as, what does success mean to either of us, or how long are we willing to do this for, and when would we sell? If we do sell, how will we sell? Well, who would he sell to? All of those questions. Or let's say, what happens if one person loses motivation, or their financial situation at home changes, their scenario changes? What happens in that case? Or if one person is contributing more than the other, which is, I think, the most common genuine problem that occurs, where one founder feels like the other founder is perhaps not contributing as much as he or she is, and they feel like it's an unjust, if the equity is divided 50-50, then it's an unjust division, it's an unjust situation for them to be in. And I would say, once emotion enters the room, legal documents stop preventing being prevention tools, and they become damage control tools. So they need to be drafted accordingly. And yeah, I think that's a very important perspective for both founders as well as lawyers who are drafting co-founder agreements as well.
Prevention tools versus damage control tools. I feel there's a whole book in that distinction. Anyways, as a lawyer, is there actually a way to write an agreement that accounts for the emotional dimensions? Or is the legal language always going to be limited to behaviors and triggers and not feelings?
Honestly, no. I don't think legal language can regulate feelings. You cannot draft a clause which says founders will remain calm, rational, and emotionally mature during a crisis. It would be a great clause if we could put it up, but I don't think it's going to be useful at all. But what lawyers can possibly do is draft for behaviors that these emotions tend to create or produce, right? The silence, the delays, the impulsive decisions, the refusal to respond, or the attempt to block business or cause damage to the company, etc. So these are mostly response behaviors that the emotions that a person can feel are going to be caused. So I think those can be predicted, those can be avoided through contracts. And a good agreement definitely creates a process, and ensures that all of these situations are kind of considered. So by giving a cooling off period or any mandatory escalations, suggesting mediations, defining timelines, and creating a exit mechanism structured in a very, very proper manner. Those are definitely things that an agreement or a legal language can incorporate. I think it can also perhaps force some difficult conversations early, and define the roles, the performance expectations, the time commitments, and exit of one founder in any case whatsoever. And yeah, I think that should do the deed.
All right. So we draft for the behaviors emotion produces, not the emotions themselves. Got it. That's actually a very precise answer, and a very honest one, in fact, about what a legal document can and cannot do. That framing of what a document can do versus what it cannot do is exactly what it brings us down to the last one. A founder listening to this right now who has a co-founder but no formal agreement yet. What's that one thing they should do this week?
Oh, I mean, I think if there's a co-founder listening to us right now and they don't have a formal agreement, they need to really have a sit down conversation with their co-founders and have a very very clear, clean, difficult conversation today to avoid a catastrophic conversation in the future. So I would suggest book a meeting with your co-founders outside of the office. No laptops, no distractions, no third parties, just the people who are founders in an organization. And they should ask each other one question, that in case this company becomes stressful or does really really well or has a life changing path going forward, what are you afraid might happen to the association between us, or what are you afraid that would happen or change between us? And this conversation needs to be just about that, not about valuation, not about equity splits, not about fundraising, not about the future projection of what we're building and all of that. A very, very in depth, simple question of how much you're ready to contribute to this and what do you think will happen tomorrow in case things get tough. And after that meeting, maybe do a practical thing, write down everything, make a note, not casually, a proper document. Add that document, share that document with a founder, ensure that all the points are incorporated, and then share that with a lawyer and have a lawyer draft an agreement which talks about what happens if someone leaves, what happens if someone stops contributing the way they're supposed to, how are decisions to be made between them, are there any unanimous decisions that can be made by a founder, are there decisions that require all the founders to sit together and take a call, who owns which aspect of what, who does the IP belong to, and most importantly, exit, define operations. That is very very important to do. And then you take that document to a lawyer and have it formalized properly. I would say most founders think legal agreements create mistrust, and a lot of founders today don't even want to have that conversation because they think the moment they broach it, it could be perceived as lack of trust, lack of confidence and all of that. But I think it's the other way around. And obviously, I'm a lawyer, so I would say this. But in reality, I think good agreements preserve trust in a lot of ways. And, they essentially remove ambiguity before emotions enters the equation. And I think that's a very, very big and important step that people entering into a business together should take.
Book a meeting outside the office, no laptops, one question. That's specific. And it works because it makes it human first before it gets legal. And honestly, which probably is the right order to be going ahead with it. All right. And one last question, Vasundhara. For a founder who's listening, who knows that they have to have this conversation with their co founder, but do not actually know how to start it. What's the first sentence to your co founder that doesn't make it sound like you're accusing them of something?
I think maybe something on the lines of, let's just have one slightly uncomfortable conversation now while things are good, so that we're not, trying to negotiate with each other for the first time when things are very, very difficult and already off track. And, maybe establish that just a conversation is never about mistrust. It is, in fact, the other way around. It's about agreeing in advance that, whatever happens, even if our role changes, even if one of us wants to leave, or we genuinely disagree on something important, this is how we're going to be handling it, because it is about the bigger picture. It is not about you. It is not about me. It is about the company, the vision, the idea, or the business that we're working on.
So basically, one uncomfortable conversation now, so you don't need a catastrophic one later on. Yep, that actually makes a lot of sense, and it's quite a honest piece of advice we could be giving out there to all the founders listening to this right now. Thank you for that. And with that, I guess that's it. That's the whole argument for doing this properly from the start. And with that, we are at the end of this episode. And one thing that we have learned is that most co-founder disputes I've heard about, including from this conversation, were not inevitable. They were the result of two people who trusted each other enough to skip an important document. And trust is not a bad reason to start something with someone together, but it is also not a substitute for an agreement. And the painful lesson, over and over, is that you need the document before you need it. So, if you're building something with someone right now, please go have the conversation this week. Not because you think it will all go wrong, but because you want to make sure it goes right. And that is part two of When Founders Fight on Beyond the Black. If this was useful, send it to one founder who has had a co founder and no agreement. Until then, take care and we'll see you next time.